We've been here for a very long time. Long enough to know how every version of this ends.
Picture a cowboy. You saw something. Wide hat, dust, a horse, and a face. The same face everyone pictures. But here's the thing about that image. Nobody gave it to you by accident, because history does not produce clean pictures like that. Not on a frontier that brutal. Not in a place where the only thing that kept you alive was what you could do. So ask yourself, where did that image come from? Because it did not come from the cattle drives. The records from those drives tell a different story, a harder one. Roughly 1 in 4 cowboys riding the Chisholm Trail was black. 1 in 4, not hidden in the margins. Right there, in the dust, in the same photographs, holding the same ropes. And yet, when you picture a cowboy, that is not what you see, which means somewhere between then and now, the image got edited, and you inherited the edit, not the truth.
We've been here for a very long time. Long enough to know how every version of this ends.
You want to understand who actually built the American West? Do not look at the legends. Look at the drag. On a cattle drive, the drag rider worked the back of the herd, ate the dust from 2,000 cattle in front of him, breathing it all day for months. It was the most miserable position on the drive, and records show again and again who rode it. But here is where it gets complicated, because the same men riding drag were also trusted with everything. There was a man named Bose Icard, freed from slavery in 1865. By 1867, he was riding with Charles Goodnight, one of the most powerful ranchers in the West. Goodnight did not trust many people. He trusted Icard with his cash, his medicine, his weapons. When Goodnight wrote about Icard later, he said that he was the most skilled and trustworthy man he had ever known. That is not a footnote. That is the whole story, except it was not told like that. The most trusted man on one of the most famous cattle drives in American history, and most people have never heard his name. That is not an accident. That is a choice someone made.
We've been here for a very long time. Long enough to know how every version of this ends.
You picture a lawman, a badge, a clean uniform, order, control, someone who represents the system. But the frontier didn't have that. Not really. It had distance, it had chaos, and it had men trying to hold something together that didn't want to stay together. There was a man named Bass Reeves, born into slavery, escaped during the Civil War, lived in Indian Territory, where the law barely reached. He learned the land, the people, the language, everything the system didn't understand. And later, the system needed someone who did. He became a U.S. Marshal, one of the first black deputy marshals west of the Mississippi. He didn't patrol streets. He hunted, tracked fugitives across miles of open land, brought them in alive, again and again. Over 3,000 arrests. Think about that. 3,000 in a place with no structure, no backup, no certainty, just skill and judgment and control. He enforced the law in a place where the law didn't exist yet. And most people have never heard his name, but they've heard the stories, the lone lawman, the mask, the myth, because somewhere along the way, the image was kept and the man was removed. But the record is still there. He was real. He stayed.
We've been here for a very long time. Long enough to know how every version of this ends.
Writing. There's something people don't talk about enough. Skill forces recognition, even when nothing else does. On the frontier, there was no room for theory, no room for image. You either could do the work, or you couldn't. There was a man named Bill Pickett, born in 1870. He didn't learn his skill in a school. He learned it watching animals, watching how predators move, how they control, how they end a struggle. And then he did something no one else had done. He took down cattle with his bare hands, jumping from his horse, grabbing the steer, controlling it completely. It became known as bulldogging, and it changed rodeo forever. Crowds came to watch it, not because of who he was, because of what he could do. And for a moment, that was enough. But even then, he wasn't always allowed to compete, not always allowed to be seen. So the skill stayed, the technique stayed, the impact stayed, but the name didn't travel the same way. And that's how it happens. The work becomes the story, and the person becomes optional, unless you go back and look at the record, because it's still there. He did it first. He stayed.
We've been here for a very long time. Long enough to know how every version of this ends.
Writing before there was structure. There were messengers. Information didn't move easily. It didn't travel instantly. It had to be carried across distance, through risk, by people willing to take that risk. The Pony Express didn't last long, just over a year, but it defined something. Speed, pressure, responsibility. Riders carried messages across hundreds of miles, switching horses, riding through weather, through danger, through uncertainty. And among those riders were men who didn't fit the image people remember. But they did the work, because the work didn't care about image. It cared about completion, delivery, reliability. The message had to arrive, and the only thing that mattered was whether or not you could make it happen. That's what built the system, not the legend, the execution. And most of those riders don't have names people recognize. But the system they carried shaped everything that came after. They moved information forward before anything else could. They stayed.